to you, but also I look forward to the questions that you have after we're done, because that's when I get to learn. You know, that's my part of the learning. So here we go. So again, I'm Rob Northrop. I'm a forester, but perhaps not the type of forester that you normally think about. I grew up in my forestry career 40 years ago in Virginia and Maryland in the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Program. So my idea of forestry is not necessarily pine plantations and pulpwood and timber production, although I don't see anything wrong with those things, but I'm more of a conservation forester. What I wanted to talk to you about today, what John asked me actually to talk to you about today, was planning and management of urban and suburban gardens for the conservation of biological diversity. At first, you can see I thought about it in terms of Florida, but what we're going to talk about today really is important on a worldwide basis, as is Florida. Florida just recently, about 10 years ago, became the 36th recognized hotspot for global biological diversity. And biological diversity pertains to not only the diversity of animals, but also populations of animals in different species, you know, different genetic makeups, kind of like us, right? You think of that, you know, some of us are susceptible to diseases, some of us can handle heat, some can handle cold. So there's a lot of variation in life, and in that variation we call diversity. And maybe a better phrase for biological diversity would in fact be biological variation. But it's that diversity or variation in life that really provides for all of the values that we find in the world around us. And I know I don't need to tell you that. You all are gardeners, and you recognize the value in plants and animals and soil, and pay attention to the climate. But that's not so for many people today, is it? With 82% of the people in the United States living in cities, many of those people having lived there their entire lives, or possibly having lived there through multiple generations, even their grandparents growing up in cities, their ties with the rest of life beyond the human-centric elements of the city are not very extensive. And here's one of my favorite photographs, by the way. This young man's name is Michael, and Michael lives in a neighborhood, or lived in a neighborhood years ago, just outside of Glens Falls Forest Park, inside the city of Baltimore. And we were all in there doing some work in the park. It's kind of a neat place. And so Michael came in one day to help out. And Steffi Graff, a wonderful photographer, grabbed this. And it's Michael who lived in a rather poor neighborhood and didn't go into Glens Falls Forest Park very often at all because he was actually afraid of it. And he was disconcerted by what might be going on in there, but felt safe to come this day. And you can see he became fascinated with the turtle, which was a great shot by Steffi, but he was just like really enthused about the whole thing. And one of the things we learned in Baltimore many, many years ago, and we keep repeating now, is that conservation, that is the conservation of all that variation in life, all of it from plants to animals and the whole thing, whole 9 yards, really is principally a social endeavor, okay? It's not so much about science and technology. It's about the choices we make and the values we bring when we decide to do something or not do something. The science and technology become the toolbox, the set of tools that we can use to sketch out those values on the landscape, and in this case, meaning the urban one. I wanted to show you where I lived, where I grew up. This is where I grew up and lived until I was 24. I grew up in Brooklyn, right on this street. This is Nostrand Avenue you're looking down. A much later photograph of Nostrand Avenue. It looks a heck of a lot better than I remember what it looked like. And where the arrow is points to the apartment I lived in. And you can see where I lived, there was no green. It was no trees, no shrubs. There were no lawns. There were no lawns behind the houses. It was simply concrete, asphalt. Buildings were brick to brick. It was solid and completely engineered. And I'm not knocking the engineers. The engineers did a brilliant job, a masterful job in the late 19th century, restoring cities to healthy environments after several different epidemics dealing with waste control and wastewater. And so today we call what we're looking at here in these pictures the sanitary city. That is the engineered environment in which human disease, at least, has been highly controlled. But it's been controlled at a cost, right? Because it has eliminated all of the wild things, all of the other living parts of our world from it, and is simply built and maintained to promote human movement, economics, and to a certain degree, human health. But now we know that, of course, that's not all what's involved in human health. Also, as you look at this, it's important to recognize that this is the logical outcome of the prevailing attitude towards our world and our environment today. Simply that it is a resource to be exploited for a maximum human benefit in the shortest possible time. This is treating the land as a commodity only. And because we have so many people living multiple generations in these urban areas, we're beginning to foster an autistic relationship between our rapidly expanding human populations, human society, now centered in cities, and the land and water. Just like the image of Michael and how Michael felt about going in the park that I showed you a little bit earlier. These are serious problems. During the next 25 years, we're going to design and establish cities, living environments for almost half of the human population. If we design them in the same way that they were designed that led to these images that you're looking at, we're going to have a significant problem in the conservation of that variation in life that supports beauty, that supports water, clean air, that supports all of the plants and the crops and the medicines that human society is so dependent upon. This I gave you just as a statement from the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. They were looking at a global strategy just for plant conservation, okay? And you can see in the face of uncertain future, an urgent priority must be for conservation through seed banking and living collections for as many plant species as possible. This is because many of the plant species in our world today, well over 100,000 of the most important just to human society, are disappearing at a very rapid rate. When I lived in Brooklyn, I had one thing that was really great in terms of connecting to something other than those streets I showed you a little while ago. And that was that I lived about 2 miles away from the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. And this is the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, just one shot. And this is a stream that runs through the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. And it is a native stream, the only one I've ever found in Brooklyn at this point. But it was a place that I went to be quiet, to be calm, but also was a place where I went and I found great beauty. And I found just a hint of another world outside of those streets. And it was here that the forester became more prominent or obvious in my view of what might be in my world. The Botanical Garden in Brooklyn is also a seed repository. It collects and maintains collections of rare seed, but it also collects and maintains rare specimens of plants. And that's all part of a global strategy for the conservation of the biological diversity or the variation in diversity, particularly in plants. I just love this photograph. I wanted to show you another one. By the way, everywhere I go, I'm fortunate to go different places in the world these last 10 or 15 years. Every place I go, I wind up in a garden. I wind up in forests too. I love forests. It's my real passion, but I love gardens. The gardens just bring me right up front with the great diversity of life. It instills me with a sense of the beauty, the contrast, and just the immense and enormity of all the variation in life that there is. It's a beautiful thing. It's hard for me to explain. Here, it's demonstrated right outside of also some beautiful architecture in Oxford University at Christ Church Memorial Garden. Wonderful place, not a conservation garden necessarily, but definitely an inspiration for those people who come up and visit it out of London. Every weekend they throng to this place. Part of it is to see this. Of course, if you lived in London, you could go to Kew Gardens. Kew Gardens is one of the biggest botanical gardens and most reputable botanical gardens in the entire world. Kew Gardens is also very much involved in the conservation of the world's plants through the collection of seed and the maintenance of seed banks. And seed banks mean that they collect the seed and they hold them in special places that have just the right humidity, just the right temperature, that they don't degrade, so that future generations will be able to propagate them and have these plants in their world. The Kew Gardens is part of the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership. And right now, Kew Gardens banks about 25% of all the seeds in the world that can be banked. Now, not all the seeds can be banked. Some seeds just, you can't collect them and put them in storage like that. But 25% of the seeds that can be stored and saved for the future exist right there in Kew Gardens. So there are these gardens and there are these gardeners whose job it is to help us conserve the great variation in plants across the entire world. Another one, and I'll show you this one. This will be the last garden I show you. Probably some of you are saying, well, that's too bad. But it's a beautiful garden also, if you ever get there. I had the good fortune to be in Melbourne, Australia, about 10 years ago, and I went to Victoria Garden. And of course, if you're familiar with the world of botany and the distribution of plants around the world, you'll know that Australia is a continent, and Australia is a very unique place that had been isolated from much of the rest of the world for most of its history. And so it has a really unique set of plants found no place else in the world. And so very, very important down there to ensure that they don't lose their seed sources. And they're doing a good job down there. Also a member of the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership. And finally, one close to home, one that we probably all recognize, and that's Fairchild Gardens, primarily dealing with tropical plants, many palms, of course. They are also part of conservation gardens networks around the world for the propagation of rare plants, for their establishment and maintenance, but also for the conservation of the seeds of rare plants. So lots of gardens, lots of gardeners, right? I mean, if you got a garden, you got to have gardeners. And that's what you all are about gardens and gardening. And I'll get back to that in just a bit. I wanted to show you just a little bit about why I talk about this here in Florida. This is the coastal plain of the Eastern United States. You probably recognize this. It runs all the way from Long Island all the way over into Texas and even down along the Gulf into Mexico. Okay, it was the 36th identified and registered biologically important hotspot in all of the world, along with places like the Amazon jungle and things like that. That's how diverse this region is in terms of its plants and its animals and its different communities of plants and animals. Really, really important. And you can see that peninsula and the panhandle is completely embedded in that. So we live in a place that is not only important in terms of its plants for ourselves, in terms of recognizing and understanding where we live, and supporting the great numbers of animals and supporting clean water and clean air in these plant communities, but also that it is actually important in terms of the variation in plants and the health of plant and animal populations throughout the world. Now, getting to a little bit of a problem that we have, and it's a considerable one, is that this map shows us that Florida, down on the lower right-hand corner with the big red circle around it, is recognized by the U.S. Department of Commerce as one of the emerging mega regions of the United States. What that means is, as we know, lots of people move it in. I know in Orange County over the last 10 years, you've had an increase in population of about 20%. That means the densification of the cities is happening, so the little open spaces and the gardens, private gardens that used to be in the city, lots of those are kind of evaporating as they tear down the old houses and build newer ones closer together. And then out in the countryside, of course, we're needing to build more dwellings to house all the people who are coming down. And this, of course, comes at the expense of open land. And that open land, of course, is the very habitat for this great diversity of worldly important plants that exist on our peninsula. One of the things also about our peninsula is that it's not only that it is part of that coastal plain with its rare assemblages of plants and animals globally important, but Florida itself, because of its unique geological history, has a tremendous number of plants and animals, particularly plants though, that are no place else in the world. They are what we call endemic. That is, they developed here, they exist here, they exist no place else in the world. So very special place that we live. And of course, here's a clearer picture of what we can expect to occur in terms of urban and suburbanization of Florida. My colleagues and I, who are foresters or forest ecologists, have been greatly focused on this change in land use. And we now talk openly about the fact that when people ask us about, well, where is the urban forest? What's the urban forest? We say the whole peninsula of Florida is the urban forest. There's very little of the wild forests that exist at all anywhere. And you can see that in the map on the upside from the 26 projection. This comes from the Florida Fish and Game Commission, Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission. So what do we see? So what do we see, and where do gardens come into what's happening around here, and how can gardeners help? Well, of course, gardeners can help by volunteering and working with those different bigger gardens, those different public and private gardens. As a matter of fact, I'm going to retire probably in a couple of years. And I'm kind of looking at one of those to kind of see if I can spend some time there and become the gardener of the trees, if you will, and worked on the conservation projects. But how do we help people uh, like you do every day, uh, better appreciate the role of their garden in the conservation of this great variation of plant life and its importance to the maintenance of all the things that we need as human society to be sustainable so that our children have a good future to look forward to. Well, here's a photograph, an aerial photograph from Hillsborough County. What you see on the bottom half of it is what they call a nature preserve. It's about 3,000 acres of forest. But built right up to it is the city, right? I mean, this is the city. It's not that dense city, but sure enough, if you look at parts of it, it's awfully darn dense. There's only enough room for a couple of trees and a bunch of buildings. How do we, as gardeners, work with communities like this, and what can we tell them? Well, of course, we can tell them all of the things that Florida-friendly gardening tells us about the use of pesticides, about the use of herbicides, about the use of fertilizers, about proper watering techniques. All of these things are important. And we also tell them about using the right place, the right plant in the right place. But I want to suggest to you that what's important also is it's the right plant for a purpose, that there is more than just a right plant for a right place. It has to have the purpose. It has to have a purpose. And their gardens, particularly when they're close to open preserves like this, really have to have the purpose of supporting the conservation of that great variation in plants that is rare in the world and endemic to Florida. We often look at these areas and say, well, we're building outside, that site is protected. Well, actually, it's not protected because you and I know, as people who deal with plants, that seeds spread. The birds spread them. The wind spreads them, right? Different animals spread them. Water can spread them. So in fact, these preserves are not, they don't have boundaries that are impassable. And quite frankly, they're very permeable. And so we've got to try to work with gardeners to better understand how to manage their gardens, what plants to use to protect not only these natural areas, but that's not going to be enough anymore. With most of the people in our world going to live in urban areas by 2060, we now have to think about conservation of plants and animals inside the city. Our nature preserves do not hold enough area to contain and maintain all of the variation in life that actually is needed to support human society. This is just outside that subdivision I just showed you, right across from it. Isn't that something? Look how beautiful that is. I mean, that's a garden in and of itself. It's a wild garden, right? This wild garden also supports some wild animals. So we have this opportunity to not only manage these natural areas, but manage those gardens also, but manage them in a way that we also can support, perhaps not solely, but support wildlife. I want to show you this. This is a circle around a little house in I guess what would be considered suburbia, but it's getting very much looking more and more like a city with some trees in it. And this particular little piece of land is 1/8 of an acre, very small, 60 by 100 feet. It has 97 species of native plants in it, okay? 43 species of vertebrate animals visit it, and 34 species of invertebrate animals on 1/8 of an acre. That's a lesson, I think. That's gardening. That's conservation gardening. And you, as people who have been taught uh, from the perspective of environmental horticulture, I think it's important that when you bring up issues about gardening, that comes up. When you go out and give your talks, you have such a great opportunity to talk to so many people uh, that this is an important topic to bring up. I think that there are many, many people in this world who would change the way they do their gardening if they understood the importance of conservation. And I think there are many people who own small pieces of property like this who would like to engage in conservation, but simply don't know how or don't believe that their little small piece of property can make a difference. This is a garden in Tampa. What you're looking at on the left-hand side is an old retirement home, and that's their garden out back, okay, with the arrow pointing towards it. The arrow pointing towards it is this tree. Well, it's a garden. You know, they go out there and barbecue and take walks and things, and they've got a gardener who works with them. They've got volunteers who work in the garden. But I went out there one day with my friend Kathy, who you see in the right-hand corner of the photograph. And we found this tree. This tree is 300 to 400 years old. This tree existed before Europeans came. This tree existed long before the virgin forests that covered this land were cut and removed for timber and for other products. And this tree itself harbors bacteria and fungi that may not exist anywhere in this particular region along the coastal plain in the Tampa Bay or the city of Tampa region. So a plant like this not only is a plant itself, we look at it, yep, it's a live oak, it's a nice big live oak, but it in fact, if you will, is a hotel, right? For all kinds of microscopic plants and animals that may simply not exist in our area today because this was here before the region was disturbed, and it's not been disturbed since. Of course, other ways, and I always love this, opportunities for conservation or conservation gardens that people like the Rare Fruit Council run, you know, vegetable and fruit heirloom gardens. A beautiful example here of a fella selling things out of his garden to people, and people are getting to see the great variation in plants that exist. And look at the smiles on their faces. They're all smiling. They're having a good time just looking at all of these different things that they could eat. They never knew that there were so many different plants that produced fruits and vegetables that was possible to eat, and that all of these things were being grown right where they lived. One last thing I want to bring to you is that relationship between the gardens and other parts of the landscape, the bigger landscape, if you will, and that's the conservation of wildlife. The conservation of wildlife here, I'm just going to take a minute to go over some of the work that a fellow I used to work with up in Delaware, University of Delaware, Doug Tallamy did. Doug began to take a look at trees and other plants in their relationship to Lepidoptera. Lepidoptera meaning the family of butterflies and moths. Doug's an entomologist. And Doug began to look at plants, host plants, Lepidoptera species, and you know, and which ones were dependent upon which plants. And then he began to realize also that you know that so many of the bird species that we have in our country at this time are dependent upon the pupa of the Lepidoptera species to provide the food for their young to grow, get strong, and fledge. And of course, in our urban areas, one of the main aesthetically pleasing forms of wildlife that we have. And of course, that's all the beautiful songbirds. So what he did was he began to look at these different trees. Okay, so you can see the Oak trees have about 534 different species of Lepidoptera. Elms have 213, ash 150, willow 550, 456, okay? So then he began to look at, well, what about the species of trees that we introduced, the non-native trees? You know, people often talk about that, native trees, they naturalized. No, don't you hear that? They naturalized. Well, not really, is what Doug's telling us. He's telling us eucalyptus trees have been in North America for over 100 years. At this point, there is only one species that uses the eucalyptus tree, one species of the Lepidoptera family, one species that produces the food necessary to support 97% of the songbirds in our continent. The punk tree, which we're more familiar with, the Melaleuca, which we see around here some, we see mostly down a little further south. It's been in North America for 120 years, okay? Only 8 species of Lepidoptera use that. Now I want you to think about that. Oak trees, 534. Punk trees, 8. Willows, 550, 456. Eucalyptus, 1. And you can see the punk tree, from its native habitat, it had 409 species. So these things do not translate over very well. I could give you the reason if you'd like. Somebody can ask me that question and I could explain that to you. But the fact of the matter is that when we do not use native species, we are not supporting the entire system of plants, animals, and the hydrologic system, and the soil ecosystem that we need for our own survival. So in the end, conservation, the goal of conservation is sustainability. We hear that word a lot today. Watch out for it. Sustainability is a very powerful phrase. It's used in very many different ways. I am an ecologist, so I'm going to use it to say that sustainability is sustainability of the processes, the way all of the different parts of our ecological world function together, and the lands that produce the resources, the beauty, and all the rest that we need to be who we are, to be human, to have a society that's profitable, that's interesting, and that is healthy. Well, that's it for me, folks. My little bit to help you with. I'd love to answer questions. And by the way, I love what you do. I want to thank you for what you do, for helping people. It's really important. But also, and more importantly to me, I guess, I want to thank you because you care. And there's not enough of us who care. So I'm going to turn my screen off, and we're back. John, I don't know how this works at this point.
Yeah, if anybody has questions, like this is the time we're opening it up here. So go ahead. You can go ahead and re-enable your microphones, your video, or you could also put in the group chat, and I'll pass them over to Rob over here.
Everybody was eating lunch, man. So.
Okay. I have a question.
Sure.
So you said that the plants we had brought in, the trees we bring in, do not help with any of the songbirds. And you said if somebody asked you, you would tell us why.
Sure.
So I'm asking you.
Okay, sure. Well, the pupa of the Lepidoptera, of the butterflies and moths, okay, what ecologists will tell you is that they co-evolved with the plants. And that means they just developed together over long periods of time. So what's happened is that the vegetation on those plants is able to be eaten and digested by the particular butterfly or moth pupa. So the mouth parts and the digestive system of that early stage of those butterflies and moths is only able to eat that specific plant and digest it. It simply can't eat other things. And we find this true not only with songbirds like this, but in other places, because insects run the world. And there are many insects like in rivers and streams that provide the food and energy for all the different aquatic organisms. And it's the same deal. If we plant trees along rivers and streams and they drop the leaves in, if it's not the leaves from the trees that have been there for long periods of time, the insects simply can't use it. And the energy source and the whole diversity of life within those streams begins to collapse. Same thing for us. Same thing for us. So if we want to support songbirds in our urban areas, and again, from my colleagues and I, considering all of Peninsula Florida at this point urban, but if we want to support songbirds even in the inner cities part, the denser parts, it's going to be through the use of native plants.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm the only.
This is Dina. I have a question.
Hi, Dina.
Aware of any studies that support the concept or the theory that native plants, from the native wildflowers all the way up the ladder to the trees, that they offer a better support to moths, butterflies, birds through their food. In other words, especially the wildflowers, the native wildflowers, provide nectar and other food source for the pollinators. Do they provide a healthier? This is the concept I was wondering if there's any studies. Do they provide a healthier, more substantial nectar and food for the pollinators than the non-natives? Is there such a study out there?
Sure, I understand your question, and I don't know, but you know what? That's why you got John. so we'll turn that one. Well, he may know the answer, but if he doesn't, he can figure that one out. That's that one's for John.
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
I'm gonna have to do some homework on that one. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you find out, send it to me.
John, I think Jarrett Daniels, some of his students are studying that concept. If you know who Jarrett Daniels is, he's over at the Museum of Natural History.
Okay.
Yeah, you may want to touch base with him. So far, I haven't heard anything.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions here in the chat. Do citrus orange kind fall into native trees? No, they are not.
Nope.
No, they're not. So I got another one that says, in the image showing built up areas in 2060, I did not see areas that supported the already minimal wildlife corridors from north to south Florida. Do you and your colleagues believe these corridors will disappear? Some of those corridors are not publicly owned, and so whether they will continue to exist will depend upon either the goodwill of the people who own them, or the economics of agriculture and timber that may allow some of those corridors to remain in some productive state. But much of that corridor system is not publicly owned. But in that map that you looked at, they assumed that those corridors were not going to exist except in publicly owned portions.
I've got kind of a question on, like the trade-offs between like ecosystem services and biodiversity. I know that like a lot of times, like there's a lot of emphasis in urban areas to put trees in that are going to survive, and trees that are going to be able to still function long term. I mean, every tree, a lot of trees they're touched at a few points in their lives when they're put in the ground, they're maintained, and then they're removed. And so we need trees that are durable. So I think that but I mean, a lot of times, like the more durable trees are these non-natives, but they're still providing like a lot of the services that we need, like shade, air filtration, that kind of thing. And so I know that sometimes, yeah, so these trees, a lot of times they're not the natives. So, I mean, what can we do for still incorporating a lot of these non-natives, especially the ones that might not be suited for the urban environment? I mean, is there just like more, I guess we got to focus on putting these trees like in parks and stuff like that, or?
Well, I mean, so the answer to your question lies in two parts, really. So at this point, if we're looking at Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn, that ship sailed, right? So, I mean, to put trees in my old street in Brooklyn would take a massive engineering effort to restore planting sites. And putting trees in an area like that would be very difficult because of the lack of soil, the lack of proper water, high levels of pollutants, and damage from people. And so not all trees are going to fit there, survive there. So, and some of the trees that may be better at surviving may in fact be non-native trees. Now, so in a case like that, I certainly wouldn't say not to plant non-native trees as long as they weren't going to be able to be invasive and have the seeds spread out and invade and push out our native plants in other places. But the thing is, the second part of the answer is that we need to plan our new urban areas better to ensure that the native plants do survive. This is not an option. We have entered in these last 20 years into, I know, what many of you have heard called the epoch of the Anthropocene. That is where human society now dominates all major systems globally, all major global systems, even soil production. We move and transform soil faster on a global basis than it's even produced, okay? There is no part of our earth that is not directly being manipulated and controlled through human society. So we don't have a great wild area anymore to draw off of. This is what people in urban areas have lost touch with. They think that all these things that we get are all coming in from this great vast expanse of natural resources, this unending well of longevity and beauty and sustenance. But that's not so. That's why people like Kew Gardens is holding 25% of the world's most valuable seeds in a very expensive system to protect the future. This is not just an interesting thing for a bunch of scientists to do, okay? So we're now concerned about how this happens, and we need to adjust the driver the initiator of the problem. And the initiator of the problem is that we're not being conscious that we're pushing all of these things out. And we need to start being more conscious about that. Not start being, we need to be conscious of it. And you, as master gardeners, are the ones who talk to at least the people, and it's only a few of them even, at least part of the population who is conscious about their garden, is conscious about what's going on. And this is the major plant issue of our lifetime. And I believe that, like myself, like John, that is part of what you signed up to do, is to raise these issues with people. Just like you raised the issue about fertilizer getting in the water, or raised the issue about using herbicides and pesticides at the wrong time, or using pesticides that are generalized and hurt different things. I mean, those are important, but those plants that they're planting, they need to be part of this world that we live in a functional way. There's a great nursery down outside of Sarasota. I won't tell you what the name of it is, but it's got a sign when you walk in, and it just says, if somebody's not eating your plants, it's not part of the ecosystem.
I have just a comment about native plants.
Sure, go ahead, Anna.
You know, they're not, the problem I think is that they're not readily available to the homeowner. You can't go to a nearby nursery and buy a lot of these plants. And secondly, also I wanted to say about trees, so many of our residential areas are these zero lot line, where the houses are so close together that a large tree would not work, or is too large for that area. But yet, we at the same time, where do we get a smaller tree that's a native tree? It's hard. It's not that simple. I would say, I wish all these plants were more readily available, so that we didn't have to drive 30 miles, 40 miles to a nursery someplace to buy a tree or native plants. And not only that, but some of the native plants, at least when I was gardening, they don't transplant well in our landscapes, in a lot of our landscapes. So it's hard. It's not easy unless you have a whole lot of time and you can drive around Florida picking up native plants. That's all.
Can I respond?
Thank you.
Sure. No, Anna, that's a great point. More of native plants nurseries are starting to pop up. But you're right. I mean, we do it ourselves, Joanne and I. And it is difficult. But at this point, it has become, in my opinion, and the opinion of many people much more in tune to these problems worldwide, that it is no longer a case of like, should we do it? Will we do it? We shall do it. We're going to do it, or we're going to lose the very wild propagals that support all of the different diversity of plants that people want to use. So it's become tough. If you can't get those plants, if you can't get those trees, I know my friend Andrew Kozer and I and some other folks did a study of tree diversity use in urbanizing areas and nurseries in the state, and it's not easy to get the native trees. But it's a value system that has to change. And again, that goes back to, if you're talking to gardeners, like I usually talk to governments, okay? I talk to city governments, county governments. I tell them, this is what you need to do. We need this to happen. And I explain to them why. Then they start to push the envelope a little bit and look for more native trees, more native shrubs, which then pushes the economic engine a little bit and helps to get those things going. But Anna, I agree with you. There's lots of challenges, And of course, even in your educational things that come out of the University of Florida, I mean, there's not a tremendous amount coming out of the University of Florida that is actually supporting you in understanding how to propagate, establish native plants and trees.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's great. Yeah.
I'd like to respond to that. And,
Sure.
as you know, I'm involved with Dr. Northrop. I'm very, very involved with the Florida Wildflower Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
When actually we're supporting some studies right now about propagation. And I'm also been involved for years with the Native Plant Societies. And Anna, you're absolutely right. And it has improved over the last 20, 30 years. I've lived in Florida, but it becomes a matter of demand. If we demand from our retailers, be it the private nurseries or the box nurseries, we want native plants, the supply will increase. And so part of what our job is to push native plants. When we're talking to the community, and the university does support native plants now, so we can't, it didn't, excuse me, quite a few years ago, but now they do support native plants and they value the native plants, and so we can echo that message, and we need to. Otherwise, you're right, the supply is going to be slim. That's,
Yeah.
okay, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, when you go out and you go out and give your talks. I know lots of master gardeners in my county, give talks in libraries and things like that. Just bring up these issues. There is an issue that is associated with the conservation of not only just the rare and endemic plants, but plants in general. There's a chat right here from Joe, and Joe says, "What's being done to protect those plant species that have seeds that can't be saved?" I'm assuming, Joe, that you mean the ones that they can't pull into those systems in the gardens and stuff. Well, I can tell you that from the standpoint of conserving the variation of plants, the best thing to do is to have all those plants growing in the wild, in situ, is what they'd say, right? Alive, growing in their communities where they normally exist, within the climates and the soils that normally exist, so that they can continue to participate in the long process of evolution, okay? And adaptation to change in climate and change in hydrology and things like that. So that's the best thing that we can do. The second best thing that we can do is, if it's possible, to take the seeds and to grow the plants in gardens. And so at least they're growing and they're propagating, right? They're continuing to propagate more seeds, right? And they're continuing to live out, even if we're supporting them to a certain degree, but we're keeping the whole species alive, okay? The last thing that we do at a last ditch measure is to create seed banks and take those seeds that we can store and put them away. Because at that point, that's all we got, right? That's all we got. And so they become very precious, and God forbid that something goes wrong with the facility, and bingo, we could lose a tremendous amount of our conserved seeds. So best, keep it in the wild or semi-wild areas. Next best, grow it in gardens, grow it in the backyards, grow it all over, grow it in community gardens. And the third best is that last ditch effort of taking those seeds and keeping them sealed away for the future.
Yeah, vegetative propagation. I guess there's one more question on here. Like about, are there efforts to propagate a lot of these plants from cuttings?
I don't know. And I don't know. I would have to assume so. I mean, that would, if I'm sure that what they're doing right now, what I have expressed to you in just a very short amount of time about these global efforts to conserve plant species, They are doing whatever is reasonably efficient and effective, and they're doing it quickly. These are projects that are going on throughout the world, internationally, and intranationally. Okay, these are cooperative projects. So.
Well, thank you, Rob. I think you gave us a lot to think about here, and it's always a pleasure to see you speak. I've been lucky to see you a little bit lately, like on some of these international urban forestry seminars and stuff. So thank you for making time to be here and you know, hit a similar audience to what you got over in Hillsborough County in terms of like very similar land history and a lot, you know, like up the I-4 corridor here. So, but thank you very much.
You're welcome. And one more time, I want to thank you all for caring. Truly, there is not enough of us in this world today. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Take care. Hey, everybody. So I guess we'll just go into all members meeting here. If you can see me. I don't have too many points here, given that we're still in the COVID era times. We'll have our next Lunch and Learn meeting in 2 weeks, which will be the 23rd, and I think it'll dovetail quite nicely with Rob's talk, because it's Dr. Larry Noblick from Montgomery Botanical Garden in South Florida. So they're kind of they work with Fairchild, and they do a lot of work with bringing in plants from all over and conserving them in areas that they might be threatened or endangered. So they're kind of it kind of fits in with Rob was kind of focusing more on what we do here, what we can do with our native environments, but this one is taking it to the next level, like what happens when these places are completely imperiled for a lot of these species that might disappear. So that should be pretty interesting. Outside of that, I can think of, we are going to have the class for next year. We're going to start initiating that stuff, the process for bringing new people in. I'm working with Seminole and Osceola County this time in order to do the training online. And we're being trained by one of the folks that's been doing a lot of the online training for bringing on new master gardeners from Hernando County, Bill over there. So I think it should be interesting, and I'll be working with Janie here pretty soon. I just got back yesterday, so I'm just trying to get caught up on email, but I should set a day here for our prospective folks to come in and have a little Zoom seminar on that. And then from there, we'll hopefully go on to interviews into October. And I know that I'll probably at least have Russ and Brenda helping me out on that front. But outside of that, life continues on. I'm gonna eventually start loosening up the guidelines here for people to come back that are like beyond the originally defined CDC guidelines. We're still kind of waiting for, I think like by the end of September, we'll feel much more comfortable given the trajectory of how the virus is moving right now. But with that said, I still think we're going to have pretty limited hours in terms of being open to the public. We're still going to keep the same hours, probably at least until December for plant clinic. And I'll probably keep the remote plant clinic going on until that point too. So that's, but yeah, in terms of letting people come back if they feel comfortable for things that are available, I think we're going to be getting there pretty soon here. So I'm just letting you all know, just to have it on your radar. And I've talked to, you know, Kevin, the director here, and other folks, and like that, we're starting to feel a little more comfortable with things. So with that said, I guess if there's anything else, if you want to, anything that I'm missing or something that you want to bring up, just go ahead and chime in here.
Okay. John?
Oh, hey, Barbara.
So this is Barbara Wilson, and I am chairperson for the Legacy Award Committee. And we actually called a lot of the people and asked them if they would like to volunteer. And I messed up. I thought Lunch and Learn was next week. So I said we would have a statement for them about how things were going. But I meant the 15th, not now. So we are still working on it. We will probably get an email out to ask the population at large to vote on the people and elect 2 people for the board for next year. And I want to thank everybody for volunteering, and we will get an email out when we have more information. And again, I'm the one who messed up on the schedule, and I apologize.
No, it's okay. Like next, we'll be back on the 23rd. So like it'll be every other week, Barbara. So.
Hi, John. This is Carol. Oh.
That's
At the
okay,
same
Carol.
time-
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to tell Dr. John that I really appreciate it. This was a super and excellent presentation. And, you know, anything to do with conservation, it's a little different than we normally get training. So I really personally appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm glad you liked it, Carol. Yeah, and I mean, I'm kind of hitting on a lot of the people that I'm more familiar with because it's easier for me to get speakers, like coming from the world of urban forestry. But I mean, he's an extension agent. He knows master gardeners. He works with master gardeners, and so I think he's pretty in tune with like what we need to be thinking about here. So I'm glad you really liked Rob, and maybe we'll have him back at some point, hopefully here. So was there anything else here?
Yeah, I have something real quick, John. So Valerie Deneen and I are doing the indoor food vendors for the plant festival. And I just wanted to put it out there, if anyone is friends with someone who has a restaurant or not a food truck, but you know, or they could have a food truck and then be able to set up a table in the exhibit hall. If anybody, you know, is personally connected with someone in the restaurant business, maybe you could either let me know, or you could possibly throw it out there to someone that you know and see if they might be interested in coming.
All right, folks, just keep it in mind, and if you can help Andrea, like just shoot her an email, like over through VMS or anything like that. I'll try to remember to include you on an email too when I send out the mass emails, Andrea.
Okay.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else here, I guess we'll wrap up. We'll go, since we had Rob on here for a full hour, we'll go for 1 hour worth of continuing education. And I guess we round up to 15-minute increments here. So we're on our way to 15 minutes. So if you want to put 15 minutes worth of volunteer time in for this meeting, you can go ahead and do that. And then I'll go ahead and enable the breakout rooms for anybody that's interested. If you're not, just go ahead and sign out, but I'm going to put it up there for everybody that wants to stick around. With that, I hope everybody's staying safe and staying well. Take care, and I'll catch you on like in a couple weeks from now if I don't catch you any sooner. Take care.